Imagine a time when herds of elk and antelope roamed the Santa Cruz hills. Imagine a time when grizzly bears and condors and creatures of every description were here in great numbers. When large pods of whales swam in the ocean close to shore. Imagine salmon in pure, clear streams, so many fish that the Ohlone natives called them bridges of silver. Imagine so many birds that when they took flight, the noise of their wings sounded like a hurricane.
There is not a country in the world which more abounds in fish and game of every description,
wrote French sea captain La Pérouse in 1786. Then the Europeans came, and they established a lifestyle that tipped the balance of nature. The settlers brought cattle, easy prey for the predators, whose numbers grew out of proportion until the hunters came and wiped them out. The grizzly became extinct here in the early part of the century. Next to go were the antelope and elk. In the mid to late 1800s, the Europeans cut the forest to clear land for settlement. After the 1906 earthquake, the loggers clear-cut with a vengeance to rebuild the cities of the San Francisco Bay Area and to provide firewood for cement and lime kilns. The incredible abundance of life, the magnificent grizzly and antelope, the elk, the vast virgin forest, exist here today only in legend. But many of us in Santa Cruz County are working hard to preserve the life that does remain. There are more than 100 plant and animal species listed as endangered or threatened that still can grow or find refuge in our county. Although not as bountiful today, this is still a magnificent place with incredible life to preserve. Forgetting humans for a moment, 90% of all the creatures here live near the county's rivers and streams, and the same lifeblood, the water, that supports them supports us too. Santa Cruz has the distinction of being the only county in the state that provides all of its citizens with drinking water derived completely from local sources. We are beginning to realize the importance of the watersheds that make this possible. Within Santa Cruz County, there are 7 major watersheds flowing into the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. This is the largest marine sanctuary in the nation and second in the world only to Australia's Great Barrier Reef. But the water supply that we drink, the same system that supports most of the life here in the county, is threatened by the cumulative impacts of human activities, by overuse, by pollution, urbanization, timber harvesting, by agriculture. Not only our drinking water, but habitat, soil stability, even climate might depend upon humanity's ability to stop degrading our watersheds. We must first understand that a watershed is more than just rivers and streams. It is a complex matrix. Watersheds are defined by ridge lines. All tributaries that flow into a common stream are part of the same watershed. Water flows across everyone's property. Therefore, everyone lives in a watershed. Professor Bob Curry is a worldwide expert on watersheds and the science of hydrology. He works with indigenous peoples to restore their water supplies. He's a consultant to governments, and he lives and teaches in the Santa Cruz area.
A watershed is that area of the surface of the earth where rain that falls on the earth collects in a given drainage way to flow out along a given stream. So wherever the rain would flow toward a stream, that comprises the watershed.
Each watershed is a unique system that catches, holds, and releases water. In a healthy watershed, much of the water that falls from the sky is retained in the soil. The water is held in the ground, in wetlands, and in underground cavities and aquifers.
And wetlands are very, very valuable in that they treat water. They capture sediment, they capture excess nutrients, they capture any pathogens in the water supply and release from the other end of the sag ponds clean, potable water.
The water is released slowly over time.
The water which falls as rain up here soaks into the ground, flows through the ground slowly, taking many years to reach Schehl Creek a half a mile away, and then feeds that stream with water throughout the year.
The water is also held in roots and leaves and stems of plants and trees. A mature redwood, for example, can hold up to 800 gallons of water. This water is released into the atmosphere in a process called evapotranspiration.
A fully functioning forest pumps many tens to many hundreds of tons of water per acre per day out of the soil. And that water is evapotranspired back into the atmosphere.
Rain and spring water, making its journey to the sea, passes through a number of very different ecosystems within the county. The watersheds have their headwaters in the coastal mountains, covered with more than 189,000 acres of second-generation redwood forest that is recovering after being clear-cut at the turn of the century. The area along the banks of the rivers and streams is known as the riparian area. This is characterized by deciduous trees such as willows, alders, and big-leaf maples, and dense understory vegetation. Downstream from the forest are the drier grasslands studded with oak and other hardwoods. Here, the riparian forest provides the thickest and most diverse habitat. Unfortunately, in many places, humans have altered or destroyed the riparian area, reducing it to a narrow corridor of vegetation along the watercourses. In some urban areas, there is no vegetation at all. Near the ocean, the rivers and streams widen. Here, the watercourses may bend or meander, and the flow of water slows. As the water slows, it leaves the silt it has carried from upstream. This forms the rich, fertile soil of what is called the alluvial floodplain. The fertile soil and the county's cool summer climate make the Pajaro Valley one of the highest producing and most important agricultural areas in the world. A healthy watershed is a dynamic balance of forces that include the amount of water in the stream channel and the silt and debris that water must carry. As these factors change, the balance adjusts. The shape of the river or stream channel, the width of the channel, steepness of the channel banks, all these will respond to different stresses on the system, such as high volumes of water or removal of vegetation. Even flooding is a natural watershed function. Flooding clears or scours the river, removing silt. Debris, especially woody debris, creates new habitats. Flooding also recharges the aquifers. We humans have so seriously altered our watersheds that, in many places in the county, the natural balancing no longer occurs. We think of water as something that cleans, that washes everything away. However, in addition to the pollutants we put directly into the watercourses, much of what we dump into gutters or spray directly onto the land ends up in our rivers, creeks, and sanctuary. Vicki Nichols is the executive director of Save Our Shores.
Well, the thing with this area and with all areas is we're all connected. Anything that happens up in a watershed will eventually work its way down into our own backyard. And we're talking about pesticides, chemicals, fertilizers, oil from cars, etc. Anything that happens up in that region, up the hills, when the rain comes, it's going to be flushed into either storm drains or work its way into streams and rivers, and it's going to end up in our marine sanctuary. So we've got to be very aware of what we do on land because it is going to have an impact. And the real key is we all live downstream. So everyone is going to be affected in one way or another.
In many areas, we've taken too much water out of the rivers, diverting it from its natural courses for residential, agricultural, and other commercial use. Near Watsonville, where groundwater levels have become low, salt water has intruded into the fresh water, contaminating wells. We've removed the natural vegetation and tree cover. A raindrop that falls in a forest takes a long time to reach the soil. Much of it is absorbed by vegetation. If the vegetation is removed, that same raindrop hits the earth almost immediately. Where development has replaced the natural soil with hard, impervious surfaces, concrete, asphalt, roofs, water that used to soak into the ground runs off with great force. If the ground is bare, or where roads have cut into hillsides or stream banks, erosion carries away topsoil. The silt fills rivers and streams, choking and killing nearly all life. Millions of interdependent creatures rely upon the watershed ecology for their survival. The watershed ecosystems provide habitats for nearly all the wildlife that lives in the county, from the large raptors and mammals to the tiniest bugs. David Sudgen is a biological consultant and president of the Santa Cruz Bird Club.
Riparian habitat is very important for birds. It supports a greater variety of land birds than most other types of habitats. And the reasons why it is important are primarily because it meets the needs of many different birds. Birds are looking for food, cover, and water. Riparian habitat, often growing close to streams or lakes, readily provides a water source, and the dense vegetation provides a lot of cover. In riparian habitat, you often have tall overstory trees and shorter middle story trees and young trees and shrubs and then a ground cover layer underneath that. So you have a variety of layers, each one providing different opportunities for cover and for foraging and nesting opportunities for birds. Also, riparian vegetation attracts a lot of insects, and that's a principal prey for many of the birds that live in riparian forests. The deciduous vegetation is favored by insects, and so it draws birds, especially important during migration periods, especially in the fall when riparian habitat can be the main habitat that many migratory birds are selecting as they make long-distance journeys over hundreds or even thousands of miles. So our riparian habitat is important year-round, both for migrating birds, also for nesting birds. One of the important features in riparian habitat is provided by dead trees, which are used by woodpeckers for excavating holes. And those holes are in turn used by many other birds as nest sites and also other types of animals as well.
As we've damaged the riparian ecosystem, the wildlife is disappearing. And in 1996, when the native coho salmon was listed as endangered, we started to wake up.
We're at a crisis level with our salmon population, and that's because of habitat degradation. And it's not the fault of one group or another, it's a cumulative impact. And what we need to do is all work together, the conservationists, the fishermen, both recreational and commercial, and start addressing this issue.
That is because the life cycle of the salmon depends upon many aspects of a healthy watershed. The salmon need water that is clear and cool, shaded by overhanging trees. Juvenile salmon need shaded ponds free from silt. The juveniles eat insects that fall into streams from the riparian vegetation. They also eat larvae that live on the decomposing leaves from deciduous trees. And the adult salmon need gravel in which to spawn, large gravel, free of silt, so that in the spaces between the rocks there is oxygen to nourish the salmon eggs. Matt McCaslin has worked hard with the Salmon and Trout Enhancement Project, STEP, to preserve, breed, and return healthy native coho salmon and steelhead to our county's rivers and streams.
What makes the Monterey Bay Salmon and Trout Project's hatchery here so different from what everybody else understands as a hatchery is that the work we're doing is we're working with the native fish that come back, and those are the fish that we're spawning, rearing, and releasing their progeny. Truly, what makes us so unique is the fact that we do only collect wild fish from wild stock, and that's what we use to spawn. Yeah, this is pretty amazing this winter. We had the best coho run that we've seen up on the Scotts Creek watershed in at least 2 decades. We estimated the run was about 300 fish.
Santa Cruz County, guided by resource planner Dave Hope, has undertaken huge projects to restore watersheds to health. Fish ladders help migrating salmon and steelhead get past barriers created by man. Other county projects lessen the threat of erosion.
In the winter, this basin fills up with sand, and we come in and remove the sand and set it off over on the side and revegetate it, and or if there's a lot, we'll take it out with a backhoe and put it in the back of a truck. This keeps out several hundred yards of sand from getting into the river every year. This gully that I'm standing in here was created by roof runoff and driveway runoff that came off of the area just above us in the watershed. That was all due to human development. All that water was channelized and put into this small arroyo that was originally about 6 feet deep and maybe 10 feet across. When we came in here, it was 60 feet deep and 120 feet across, and we estimate 1,000 cubic yards moved out of the system through excess runoff off of the watershed above. This is the largest of all the check dams. Again, the spillway on this is about 8 feet high, maybe 9 feet high. These structures were very instrumental in protecting the house that's down below. Had these structures not held back the sand and debris from the '82 storm, the house down below definitely would have been taken out. These dams were filled up in one night with 1,000 cubic yards worth of soil. Again, one of the real benefits of this project is how it's allowed the sidewalls to revegetate. These were all sandy slopes with trees collapsing into from the rim. These are boulder wing deflectors. They're opposing wing deflectors. What they're intended to do in most cases is to create a pinching of the flows, which accelerates the hydrology to clear out pools. The spawning gravels that you see here were not present before. It was pure sand. So we're actually getting some clearing and sorting of gravels and creation of some spawning, rearing, and cover habitat.
Watershed restoration has made a difference for the salmon, for every living creature, even the humans, because the degradation of the watershed affects us all. We've also learned to rethink and to reform many of our attitudes. We're learning to be less wasteful, to walk more gently upon Mother Earth, to stop dumping and polluting, to conserve water and other natural resources, to consume more wisely.
Yeah, one of the things that people don't even realize is that they drain a swimming pool that runs into a storm drain that goes into a creek. They could essentially be killing thousands of fish, steelhead and salmon, unsuspectingly, just because the small, tiny amount of chlorine that's in that water is highly lethal to those fish.
We're looking at development, road building, and logging to limit these activities within the riparian area, to take measures to stabilize stream banks and to slow down erosion. We're admitting we made mistakes. Policies adopted in the 1940s and 50s that attempted to control rivers within concrete channels don't work. Bruce Van Allen is former mayor of Santa Cruz and heads the San Lorenzo River Restoration Institute.
And in the aftermath of the 1982 near flood, studies were done that showed that the levee system that had been built in the late 50s, in fact, could not contain the size of flood that it was designed for. And so not only was that levee system ecologically a disaster because of the complete removal of all vegetation and most habitat from the river, but also turned out to not really be adequate for flood protection. We have now a plan adopted by the city. It's part of the city general plan that has 3 major goals. First, it brings back an adequate level of flood protection. Secondly, it allows us to restore vegetation to revive the food chains and bring back the ecological value. And thirdly, it makes the river really once again potentially part of the surrounding city instead of this back alley that we all have just ignored, and buildings have been built with their backs to and things like that. It turns it into a sort of a linear urban park with lots of trees and walkways and a very pleasant place to be.
Another mistake we made was to introduce non-native plant species that have invaded and are killing the native vegetation, such as the sycamore grove. That is an important part of the riparian habitat.
In March of 1995, the Pajaro River flooded, leading to a decision to remove a large area of riparian habitat along the river In all, some 8 miles of riverside forest was clear-cut, leaving only individual trees scattered about 50, 75 feet apart. And that affected one of the most important riparian areas in the Monterey Bay region. And in spring of 1996, the Santa Cruz Bird Club conducted a study to try to assess what effect that clearing had on bird populations. Many species that are characteristic of riparian forest were completely gone from the area that had been cleared. So the amount of habitat that was lost was tremendous, and the number of birds that was affected was tremendous as well.
Through many efforts by the community and individuals, Santa Cruz County has become one of the world leaders in watershed restoration. Money is scarce these days, and we are learning to work together to share our resources. The Coordinated Resource Management and Planning Groups, known as CRIMPs, do just that, under the guidance of the Federal Resource Conservation District, directed by Rich Casal.
Most all CRIMPs are organized by watersheds because everyone within a watershed has something in common. And that's what's so neat about CRIMPs, is that it basically brings people together to work together, to physically do things together. There's no other place in California that has as many organized watershed efforts as in Santa Cruz County. To date, there are 5 different CRIMPs currently operating in this county, and there's at least 2 more that are on the drawing boards that are interested.
Children in more than 100 Santa Cruz area schools are learning to be stewards of watershed health, thanks to the curricula developed by STEP and the Coastal Watershed Council. The students conduct restoration projects in the streams, remove non-native vegetation, and many classes, such as this group from San Lorenzo Valley High, rear and release baby steelhead fry. Here, students in Glen Reed's field ecology class at Harbor High monitor water quality in Arana Creek. Along the Pajaro River, 5th graders at Aroma School are encouraging the growth of native vegetation and have planted more than 100 native box elder, cottonwood, and willow trees. This will widen the riparian corridor, giving irrigation runoff a chance to soak into the ground, so agrochemicals can be filtered out of the water before the runoff reaches the river. Students at the Outdoor Science School monitor water quality and test for silt from erosion upstream along Corralitas Creek.
For me, one of the most exciting parts of my work now on working to promote restoration of the river is to work with local young people who have grown up never having known the river in a really natural state, and yet who have learned to care about the environment and have learned that maybe they shouldn't be so satisfied with seeing a continuing process of destruction of the environment.
It is up to individuals also to maintain our watersheds. Robert LaRosa has stabilized the stream bank and restored fish habitats along the portion of Moore Creek that flows through his property in Soquel. Dave Allen, who lives in Quail Hollow, protects the stream banks behind his house from erosion by cleaning out debris and replacing large stones that heavy rains wash away each year. How do we know a watershed has regained or is maintaining health? The Coastal Watershed Council, guided by Executive Director Donna Meyers, teaches volunteers to monitor the health of local watersheds.
Historically, water quality was looked at from a human perspective. What was safe for us to drink and to play in and to swim in, those types of things. Now we've learned to look at and broaden the focus of watershed monitoring to look at water quality from the standpoint of what provides good habitat.
Here, volunteers measure pH, water temperature, conductivity, amount of dissolved oxygen and turbidity, cloudiness, of the water near Arana Gulch. Counting the number of macroinvertebrates, such as insect larvae and worms that live in the riverbed, also indicates water quality in a stream. In the lower San Lorenzo River, Donna Meyers and Jason Parke of the Coastal Watershed Council find little evidence of life. Upstream in Henry Cowell State Park, the same river supports many different invertebrates, including species that cannot survive in polluted water. As more and more people inhabit the Santa Cruz area, more and more stress will be placed on all our resources, and especially upon the water and watersheds. Serious policy decisions about our watersheds will continue to confront us. We must seek the truth must back our decisions with scientific fact to avoid making mistakes like we did in the past. The decisions we make today about flood control, development, road building, and logging will be our legacy to our children. Let's work to assure that this legacy is not merely the words, "We are sorry." As we continue to work together to restore, to preserve, and to enjoy the magnificent watersheds of Santa Cruz County and the entire Central Coast, we are recognizing the vital role that humans play in the watershed system. It is we who can and who must protect our watersheds. We all live downstream.